So hi and welcome to the Data Strategy Gurus podcast. Today we have the illuminated Bill Schmarzo for a nice talk here with some great lightnings in the background. Bill, I always admired your title of the Dean of Big Data. You're a teacher, an author, the Chief Data Monetization Officer, professor, a visiting professor at the National University of Ireland. You're connected to the University of San Francisco. So a real big mouthful. So what of these activities do you like most to do, or any preference?
There's probably two things that jump out. First one, I love to teach. I find teaching it forces me to really think through topics. If you got to teach it, you really have to make sure you understand it and you can distill it down to its base elements if you're trying to teach students some of these concepts. That's probably number one. And number two is actually quite linked to it, which is working with customers. And many times I'm working with customers in a teaching mode as well. But the customers are different than students because they have real world problems they're trying to solve. And so that's a really great test to see, do my concepts help them in addressing those real world challenges? So those are the two things I like to do.
Yeah, that's amazing. So you wrote some books as well, and I just let me list the titles: The Economics of Data Analytics and Digital Transformation, The Art of Thinking Like a Data Scientist, The Big Data MBA, Driving Business Strategies with Data Science, and then The Big Data, Understanding How Data Powers Big Business. What I see here is a lot of business acumen and not really talking about data in itself. So what for you are the most relevant things in data management, data-driven, the big hypes, what everybody's shouting, but not really realizing?
Great question. And so I'll watch my language here, but being data-driven is bullshit. All right, somebody says, well, we want to be data-driven. Well, what does that really mean? I mean, there's got to be a consequence or an outcome from being data-driven. And I find that organizations struggle in the concept of, well, what outcomes are you trying to drive? Being data-driven in of itself isn't sufficient. So a lot of, you mentioned a lot of business acumen, a lot of economics. And the reason why I like economics is because economics is about the creation and distribution of wealth or value. At its heart, we don't want to be data-driven. We want to be value-driven using data. And so while that may seem like a little bit of weasel words, it changes the frame entirely. We want to be value-driven, leveraging data, right? We want to make more informed, more reliable, more accurate decisions living in an imperfect world. So that's, to me, is the key thing that I keep striving to communicate.
Yeah, I know we're discussing as well for aligning your data strategy to your business strategy and your outcomes. That's intriguing. But can I conclude that a lot of companies still don't understand their own business and see on what they need to steer or optimize it? Because I see if you put that question forward, it's apparently a difficult question to see. Do you want to become more profitable? Do you want to get more margin? Do you want to have faster time to market? What type of issues do you really have as a company? And that's not an easy question I get answered when I'm working with a lot of clients.
You hit one of the most challenging conversations I have with customers. And you summarize it really well, which is, what are the KPIs or metrics against which you're going to measure your success as a business? There's financial goals, there's shareholder value, there's return on investment, net present value, all that blah, 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 financial stuff. And, that probably worked great in the 1950s. My dad was working. But the world has changed, right? The world demands more. When you demand, we're very customer-centric, customer satisfaction. We're becoming more and more employee-centric. For long-time employees were something we tossed aside, kind of like data. Employees came and go, data came and go. But we're now seeing an environment where actually employees are pretty important, especially employees that have deep experience. We know there are society ramifications. We know there are environmental ramifications. We know there are ethical. So The really hard question you have to ask organizations is, what are the KPIs metrics against which you measure success? And they struggle because they have blinders on. They think, well, we got to make sure we make money. We got to increase profit. No, in fact, I would argue that making profit is probably a lag indicator, and better lead indicators are things like employee satisfaction, customer satisfaction, operational efficiency. You know, if you're, Chipotle and very much environmentally concerned, then there's all kinds of environmental issues and locally sourced suppliers. These are all the lead indicators. You optimize the lead indicators, and the lag indicators come along. You know, we're going to increase profitability. I tell you what, I can walk into a company today, any company, and I can increase their profitability over the next 3 months, guaranteed. You know how I do that? I'd fire everybody. I just fire everybody, right? So 3 months we'd have great profits, and then 4 months later we'd be out of business, right? So it's a stupid KPI against which to try to optimize it, because it's a lag indicator.
Yeah, and I think they're struggling with the lead indicators. It's good that you split them up, lead and lagging, because most of the time in these strategies you're focusing especially on the lagging indicators. You mentioned as well employee satisfaction thing. And I've been discussing more in the soft part of not purely data, but next to the business with coaches and so on. And there you see, if you don't have the blockages and you're happy at work, you're so much more, productive, if we can call productive a good word, but producing better results, let's call it like that. And there is so few attention on the human aspect of people working in a company. They try it with KPIs, the year-end evaluations, improvement plans, whatever you can imagine to optimize the people. But you need to do that in a different way to keep them happy. Is there something where you see in your human capital what you can do with that?
Okay, so you're spot on. So the world of AI, our ability to ultimately be successful with AI is entirely human dependent. And what I mean by that, especially from an employee perspective, is there are a lot of things that AI can do, but there's a lot of things it can't do without adequate AI humans. For example, feature engineering is very much a human-centric process. And the people who have the best insights into which variables and metrics might be better predictors of performance aren't your data scientists. They aren't your senior executives. They're not sitting people in mahogany row, the big fat cat smoking cigars like in the old days, right? No, they're the people who have the best ideas are the people who sit at the front lines of the organization, who are dealing with customers daily, who are dealing with the operations. They're the ones who they leverage their natural intuition to figure out, well, these things may be variables. I just watched a movie. I'm sorry to go on a tangent. The movie's called, I think it's called The Imitation Game. It's about Alan Turing, the famous Alan Turing, the AI original, and his goal to break the Nazi Enigma machine in World War II. Yeah. And it's a marvelous movie. It stars Benedict Cumberbatch, who's a marvelous actor, Dr. Strange. And he's building this machine. He's made this great comment. He said, the only way to beat this machine, this Enigma machine, is with another machine. So he's in a process of building this machine, but he can't get the machine to learn fast enough, right? A common problem we see in AI and ML, right? He's struggling with, how do I get this machine to learn faster? How do I figure out how do I short circuits and stuff? Because there's just an infinite number of options, and I got to find a way to trim the option tree. And so he's talking to this woman who, this is during World War II, who is intercepting all the Nazi messages. And she's writing them down. And they're in a bar and she's talking to Alan Turing. She says, well, I noticed that this particular person who's sending this message must have a girlfriend, because he or she starts her message with the same 4 or 5 letters every time, which must be his girlfriend's name. And you can see Alan Turing goes, oh my God, because he knows that every message that gets sent ends with Heil Hitler. By knowing that, he plugs that into the machine. Machine has now got a jump start, and boom, he ends up training this machine, and it's a great story. But you never know where the best ideas might come from, which is why this human empowerment is so critical, especially for people at the front lines. They're the ones who have the intuition and the sense. And so if we want AI to reach its full potential, to really transform the world we live in, that transformation has to start culturally with the employees and people, not with the algorithms.
Yeah, and what we see very often, if you start with a strategy exercise trying to make things work, you don't really go to the end user, because that seems to be a bit too simple, not important struggles they have on a daily basis. But if you could say we can automate your process and you have to do 5 steps instead of 10 steps, it's a huge improvement for them, and they can. Then we come into the value creation part, where they can spend their time in a better place or ideate more. But there is I still have very often the time that people needs to be busy. They want them to be busy, but don't want them to work smart in such a way. Where I think technology is really the driver to achieve that, but we're missing out all the time.
So one of the tools that I think is a marvelous design tool for understanding where value is created and really understanding your customers and stakeholders is this customer journey map, where you literally walk through a journey the customer is going through to achieve an outcome. That's a really key point here, right? Is that the reason why employees, customers do things is they're trying to achieve an outcome. I'm trying to buy a house. I'm trying to pick a college. I'm trying to fix a broken crane in a forklift somewhere, right? Whatever, right? They're seeking outcomes, and there's a journey they go through to achieve that outcome. And the journey map forces you to walk in their shoes, understand what decisions are they trying to make along that journey? What actions do they need to take? What are the KPIs, metrics you're trying to leverage to help optimize that? What are the gains and the pains? And if you understand that journey map, there's 2 great things that happen. First off, you can identify places you can plug in AI and ML to help optimize certain steps in that journey. But if you empower the human, you can go beyond optimization to reinvention. You can actually reinvent the process, because they can say, well, if I could do this and this instead, I wouldn't need to do that. The AI model is never going to tell you that if you skip these 2 steps, you'd be doing better. The human can say, well, my gut says if I can get this information here, I don't need to do these 2 steps. You just reinvented the process. So while AI is great for optimizing, you need to have humans if you really want to reinvent.
So it's really the interpretation from the human brain or the human capabilities that is lacking in AI and algorithms and technology, if you hear you talking.
Yeah, I mean, we already know that mathematically based algorithms can help us. I'm sure you're like me, that I never calculate square root in my head anymore. Right, I can pick up a calculator, I can type a number in, push a square root button, and it can tell me, right? What's the square root of 37? Oh my God, if I had to figure that out by hand, right? My calculator will tell me in less than a second, right? So there are certain tasks that machines, mathematically driven algorithms, are great at doing. Let's let them do that. I don't need to calculate square root anymore. Let the machine do it. However, there are opportunities that humans bring where they can reinvent. They can understand what they're trying to accomplish, what outcome they seek, and understand the journey they're going, and say, if I could do this and this here, I wouldn't need to do that. I could eliminate entire steps in the journey. So again, if you don't empower the humans and couple them with what AI can do, you'll never see the full blossom of that AI bloom.
Yeah, and I really understand that you say the customer journey map. I've been thinking it through. Mostly you go to the employees, which are just in front of your users, in your consumers and the customers. So if you take that customer journey map, you build as well the holistic view of the complete problem, what you need to be solving. I saw that you preach a bit as well the design thinking approach in that, and I've been reading up again what are the principles of a design thinking. It's empathize, what you said, okay, connect to your users with the customer journey map, define, so state your users' needs and problems, exactly what you've been telling. How is their customer journey? What things, what insights do they want to have? What do they want to achieve? If they're coming and talk to your company. And then ideate is the part where you say, bringing the human again to have that improvement, which you can't get out of the algorithms. And of course, you have the test thing, just try and fail miserable, but fail fast, and they get those insights and take that in the feedback loop. So interesting how that all comes together. And we're discussing about AI, models, technology, data science, but still we're talking a lot about the human aspect in such a way.
Yeah, because AI can solve almost an unlimited number of problems, almost unlimited. My college professor in math would have a fit for me saying that statement. But it's almost unbounded in what it can do. And what we need to do is to give it the frame around which it needs to work, right? It's the frame, provide a frame. Now, what frame are we going to provide? Are we going to, the thing that it always drives me nuts as a data scientist is when some manager or some executive comes to me and says, hey, I got this data set. What's valuable in that data set? My first question back to them is, well, how do you define value, right? I need that frame. I need the frame around. So I'm a big fan of the frame I'm going to use. The frame I'm always going to come back to is the value frame. I get this value engineering framework I actually have created and talked a lot about. That's where I start. And then I can start figuring out where and how AI and ML and all the great technologies we have can help. But if I don't have that frame, then I'm just going to flail around.
Yeah, you put it right. I mean, the value, and that's very hard. We often use it as well. Value driven. What is the value? Create something that is valuable for the people that are listening to your podcast, the content you're sharing. People need to be able to pick something out. But apparently that's a difficult question to answer as well, because of course it's biased. It's a personal thing. My value is not the same as what for you has value. Is there something you said? I designed my framework to help out on finding that value for a company, for a person.
Well, that's what makes things really powerful. If you bring together, let's say that your organization has a business initiative, and your business initiative is to, let's say, improve retention of our most valuable customers. Wow, now that's a loaded question, guys. My most valuable customers is an exercise in of itself, right? But how do I retain my most valuable customers? Great initiative, right? Coming up upon a recession. Should be job one for every organization. Job one is to retain your most valuable customers. The best way to figure out the KPIs and metrics against which I'm going to measure that is to bring in a diverse set of stakeholders: sales, marketing, finance, operations, partners, channels. Heck, I'd even bring in a customer. Oh my gosh, talk to a customer. And you bring in, what is it, how do they measure success? I mean, think about this. Think about your initiative is to improve retention of your most valuable customers. Well, what if you brought in some of your most valuable customers and asked them, what outcomes do they seek? What are the KPIs and metrics against which they're going to measure over the next time period, their relationship to your organization? Imagine how much that would shock things, right? The things that they think are important probably aren't the same thing that you think are important. But it's that where AI excels is when you bring together a diverse set of KPIs and metrics that don't line up. And then the AI model has to constantly try and test in a real world environment. And it's constantly learning. If you're only optimizing against 3 metrics, I can do that with a calculator. If I got to optimize against 30 or 40 metrics that aren't in alignment, that conflict is where the innovation happens. This is where I want to have synergy. I want to retain customers while I also do this, while I also do this. It's that cascading set of KPIs that all interact and that drives innovation. We shouldn't try to avoid conflict and friction. We should embrace it, because that's where the best thinking is going to come. And it doesn't come by compromising, by letting the loudest voice in the room pound down the KPIs metrics they want to go with. It's going to come with synergizing, where everybody says, I have this, you have that, you have that. how do we do this and that to create something better? How does 1 + 1 + 1 equal, 11 or 15 or 1,000?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, if I see mostly you try to use your AI on a few measurements or friction points, but where you say use them on all the friction points together, and that's where the AI will be helpful. But I see it as well, if that's a good exercise to try to break down the silos and see, okay, we need to have information from the marketing department, for customer success department, from finance, and combine that, and then have the algorithm suggest what we should do and try out. Really, really nice take on that. So if you think about the human aspect in all the data and all the technology and the fast paces on which technology has been developed, we see a shortage of skills already for a few years. What do you see people need to thrive in the new world with all the technology and become a leader and help companies get into that leading position and step out of the lagging? There's a lot of things that need to be changed in my feeling, changing the culture, educating people on the possibilities of technologies, of new ways of working, and so on and so forth. So it feels like a very complicated journey, but yeah, what people should you get on board to get rid of the typical management style and be really leading in there?
So good question. Very interesting question. So there are three things that jump to mind. I actually wrote a series of blogs on this topic, and it kind of revolves around the general category of cultural literacy. So organizations need to be data literate. They need to understand where and how data is being collected and how that data is being used, sometimes against them. Right? They just need to be literate about data. They need to be literate about what AI and ML can do. Not that they need to build a neural network. They just need to understand that these techniques are out there on an individual level, trying to understand and identify and codify your individual trends, propensities, and patterns. Right? That's what they're trying to do. And then there needs to be training on a decision literacy. And maybe that's the most challenging one, is how do you make informed decisions in an imperfect world? Right? It's not just a challenge for organizations, it's a challenge for the human race. Let me give you, I'll give you a non-political example first, right? In the US, 13% of people in the US do not wear seatbelts. Now, the numbers show that your probability of dying in a car accident without wearing a seatbelt is 100 times greater. Now, you're 100 times more likely to die in a car accident not wearing a seatbelt than you are wearing a seatbelt. But 13% of people don't wear seatbelts, even though their probability of dying in a car accident is so huge. Is that a failure of the system? Is that a failure of our education system? Making decisions is hard because there's data that drives that, but people also have personal propensities. Somebody probably says, I'm not going to wear a seatbelt because I'm my own boss. I can't argue with that, right? I'm not going to get a COVID vaccination because I'm my own person. Now, if you're saying I could get a COVID vaccination because you believe in your right to make that decision, I'm never going to challenge that. Right? If you're going to say I'm not going to get a COVID shot because the COVID shots are full of microchips, I'm going to tell you, man, you should send those COVID vaccinations to all the automotive manufacturers because they're really short on chips, right? So making decisions is really hard. Humans do it very poorly. Humans are really poor decision makers. And I like to say, there's no better place to learn the lesson of poor decision making than to go to Las Vegas. Right? Go to Las Vegas and you can see firsthand how humans make really bad decisions. So what can we do as an organization where we've got data and analytics providing these insights, these predicted propensities, to help our people make more informed decisions in an imperfect world, understanding that some decisions are going to be wrong. Being wrong isn't bad, as long as you learn from it, as long as you're feeding that back in the loop. So how do organizations get ahead of themselves? I'm going to tell you right now, you need to teach everybody to think like a data scientist. I got a book on that, right? You need to teach everybody to think like a data scientist. You need to understand what data has in it. You need to understand how AI and ML works, but more importantly, you need to understand how to make informed decisions in a world, an imperfect world, where some of the decisions are going to be wrong. You're going to have to learn from those decisions, and you're going to have to move forward. Being wrong in decisions is natural. Wearing a seatbelt in a car does not guarantee you're not going to die in a car accident.
No, I fully understand, and I think, yeah, definitely being wrong is not bad, or taking a bad decision, but our society is so focused upon doing things right, and you try to improve really on, you only look at the bad things, trying to improve that, and not on the good things and steering forward on these positive aspects. So I think there is a lot of work to do on the positiveness and how we lead companies and lead the world as well, and allow a bit of failure, but take the lessons out of that. And that's still a big challenge, what I see happening.
The leaders out there have mastered the art of learning through failure. They use experimentation. They're always trying different things. They're not afraid to fail because they know they're learning. The companies that are going to fail are the companies that are afraid to fail.
Yeah, that's what I recently read about Edison. They've been telling him, you've been messing around so long time with this electricity kind of thing. You've tried 9,000 experiments and you're not getting there. And he says, yes, what did I learn? 9,000 ways of how not to produce electricity. And it's a big lesson what you can take on failure, and look in a different way of what did we learn, looking back at the things you tried out, and how you can improve on that.
Exactly.
So I've got a few choices to make. I've got about 10 of the keywords. So if you can help me out on making a choice between the both of the two words. So what would you pick? Influencer or thought leader?
Influencer.
A data lake or a data warehouse?
Neither.
A data mesh or a data mess?
Data mess.
Synthetic data or data virtualization?
Ooh, I'm going to skip that one. I think that I would need more definitions. They
Okay, we can take those later. Then you have data products or conformed dimensions?
Both.
Data busy or data driven?
Ooh, good one. Data driven.
A center of excellence or silos?
Center of excellence.
Data experiments or super governed data value chain?
Data experiments.
Dog data or light data?
Say that one again. Dog data?
Dark data or light data? Dark, yeah.
I'm going to go dark.
And then data driven or data informed?
Data informed. Which is, I would go beyond it. If only given those two choices, I would say data informed.
And I was kind of intrigued by your data lake or data warehouse, where you said neither one of them.
Yeah, that's the dog. That's the getting the cart ahead of the horse. It drives me friggin' nuts that whenever somebody's going to launch a data and analytics project, the first thing they do is, well, we're going to build a data warehouse, data lake, data mesh, data fabric, data, blah, blah, blah. We're going to build a data thing. Really? Do you understand how the organization creates value? Maybe I would start there first. You're going to eventually end up having one of those data repositories. And by the way, I'm going to piss a lot of people off in saying it's almost immaterial. Data warehouse, data lake, data mesh, as long as you have conformed dimensions, master data management, you can, as long as I can get to the data wherever it may reside, virtualizing it, whatever, that's great. But I don't really care about that. It's kind of like asking me, well, what brands of spark plugs do you have in your car? Oh, I don't know. Do I really care? What kind of a container does your gas sit into in your car, right? Or I don't know. I want to start the conversation with value. And the reason why I want to start this is because you're going to build a data and analytics architecture. You're going to build some sort of data repository. You're going to build some analytics sandboxes. You're going to build, a data management capability from ideation to outcome. But if you don't understand how the organization creates value, then how do you know what data sets you want to start with? I can't tell you how many times I've talked to CIOs, and I'm talking to one today, who they built a data lake. They had a data warehouse. It was marginally successful, did great for reporting, but now they want to go to the data lake. They built a data lake. They threw 35 data sets into it, opened the doors to their business users and said, go forth and be fruitful. And all they got were crickets. Right? I always enjoy, one thing I like to ask a CIO, just to kind of get them pissed off at me, I like to ask, so what's your most important data set? Yeah, that's the exact reaction. Well, how am I supposed to know that? Exactly, but you can't determine the value of data in isolation of the business. So the conversation has to start with what's of value to the organization. What are the KPIs and metrics? What decisions are we trying to drive? Who are the stakeholders who are going to, all right, and then eventually you're going to figure out, well, I'm going to need these data sets. I'm going to need these analytic models. I'm going to need these capabilities, and I'm not going to need them all. That's the beauty. Your first use case might only need 3 or 4 data sets. It won't need 35. I can guarantee that. And so you can build out whatever your data repository is. You can start building it out use case by use case. It isn't centralized, decentralized. It's yes. Right? It's how do let's start with value and then figure out what the right architecture is given where the data resides in the culture of your organization.
Yeah, that all boils down if you can get that clear. I've got a question which you partially answered as well. It's what makes a good data strategist? So I think you answered that in looking at the value and then trying to identify that, and further down defining the data architecture. But is there something else what you can bring to that?
So I like to tell organizations that it's not back in the day. I used to say organizations do not need a big data strategy. Do not need one. What you need is a business strategy that incorporates big data. Again, that's a little flip. Just going to change the frame a little bit. And we're going to say, well, what is it we're trying to accomplish? What are our business initiatives? And how do data and analytic help us to achieve what we want to achieve? It just makes everything so much cleaner. I can iterate more quickly. I can take advantage of a lot of today's modern technologies, and I can build up my data analytics capabilities, iteratively. I can have, a debate I'm having right now with a lot of folks is data mesh or data lake. My answer is, yeah, you can have them both. They serve different purposes in light of how I create value. One's great, I think, at doing exploration and understanding my data and building models quickly. Other one is really great at operationalizing that, polishing into my operational systems. I can have both, but I really don't care as long as I know that here's how I'm going to create value, and here's what data and analytics I need, and here's how I'm going to measure the effectiveness of that.
Yeah, exactly. And then I've got, what is the extraordinary data strategist, which goes a step beyond that?
Oh my gosh, that's a good question. My default answer historically would have been somebody who has an economics background. So it gets back to the value thing. But I think we're asking for, in the NBA basketball, I'm wearing my Golden State Warriors jersey tonight, right? Because they won. In NBA basketball, there's great value placed on what they call two-way players. Players who both are effective on the offense and are effective on defense. They can do both. That's what we're looking for from the most excellent, superior strategist, business strategist, is somebody who understands economics, so around the value creation, but also understands design thinking about human empowerment. Because at the end of the day, if we don't help transform the culture of the organization, if we don't empower everybody in the organization, we'll never reach the full business potential. So I guess the most excellent one is somebody who understands economics from a value creation perspective, and someone who understands design thinking from an empowerment perspective. And you bring those together, that's a winning combination. And by the way, I didn't say anything at all about needs to know how to write a machine learning algorithm, needs to understand auto regression. Thank God there's a million people out there coming out of university understand that. I don't need that. I got my calculator. I can put 37 and push square root and I get the answer.
I think they need to tweak a lot of the job ads, defining that, because if I lead on data strategies and about the data architects, mostly it's kind of, you have to know SQL, you have to know Python, but nobody talks ever about creating the value as such, understanding the business. That's of lesser importance. That's the
Well,
feeling I
especially
get.
a data strategist. A data strategist shouldn't give a holy hoot and heck about the architecture. You got lots of really smart people who have lived that for years. I can find 20 or 30 of those people who would do a great job. The harder challenge is data from a value perspective. That's your value. That's what your role is. I didn't hire an architect.
Bill, without any question, you're really a thought leader in the data space. Are there still some people where you look up against that inspire you, great examples, and you massively respect?
There's probably no one that I think more of than Kirk Bourne. Kirk Bourne is just, he wrote the foreword in my last book. I find whenever I get a chance to listen to Kirk, I listen. He's brilliant, he's smart, he's funny, and he's about as humble as you can get. But my second category of people, and I know a lot of people really, like John Thompson and Doug Laney, and I talk to people on LinkedIn. You can see the whole list of my cohorts in that space. But the people who teach me the most are either my customers or my students. Customers, because they have real world problems. And if you can, most of the customers I work with, well, obviously the ones I work with are ones who want to work with me. So they got a problem, they're open-minded, and they want a different approach. I've met some wonderful customers who've become lifelong friends because they've got this, this idea that we can do things better, and I learn a ton from them. Every time I talk to them, I learn a ton. But I also learn a ton from students. And the reason why I learn, because they're not afraid to raise their hand and say, I don't get it. They're like Tom Hanks in the movie Big, raises his hand and says, I don't get it. Now, why is that important? And I was sitting in one of my MBA classes teaching, and we were talking about neural networks, and I was kind of trying to provide an explanation of how it worked. And one of the students said, I don't get it. Why is that important? I said, in the scope of things, it's not. In the scope of things, understanding how to build a neural network is not important. Now, all my data scientist friends, and I've got some good ones, are going to roll over. But I will tell you right now, all of my data scientists who work for me, the first thing I teach them is design thinking. I send all of my data scientists to design thinking school because they have to learn how to think like a customer.
Those are great words. Bill, to wrap up, standard question what I have, and an interest as well. I've been a former DJ, very interested in still a lot of music which is going on, having a huge vinyl collection. So I'm always interested in what is your choice of music? What do you really love, gets you energized, gets you out of bed, or dancing on the tables?
Oh my gosh, so you're gonna think I'm very bizarre. So first off, I played jazz trumpet in college. So I'm a big Maynard Ferguson fan. Maynard Ferguson was a jazz trumpeter in his band. So Maynard Ferguson. I love funk. So give me Ohio Players, give me Parliament, give me Earth, Wind and Fire. In fact, if you want to see me dancing, I'll crank those things up and I'll go back and I'll put on my disco shoes and my disco jacket and I'll move around. And I also very much like Jerry Reed, who is this country western singer. He's just got a great voice, and his songs have great rhythm to them. So if you probably can't find any more three different kinds of musicians or artists than Maynard Ferguson, funk, and Jerry Reed.
So rhythm and vibes keeps you going, besides data and business strategy, if I well understood. Bill, such an amazing conversation we had. Thanks for your time and being a guest on my podcast, The Data Strategy Gurus. So thanks very much for your time. Happy to have you, and delighted with all the answers.
Thank you very much. It was fun. You asked me some hard questions, so you made me think. And I took 2 pages of notes. Again, I always tell people, you can tell I had a good interview because all the notes I took. So this is great.